Thanks, everybody, for joining us here on Around the League, a new podcast from UGASports.com. I am Dayne Young, your host and an analyst for UGASports.com. With me, I've got the Hall of Fame head coach, Jim Donnan. Hey, Coach, how are you?
Doing good. Glad to be with you. I like this format here. We're going to bust them up here.
And also joining us, this is a weekly crew. We have Brent Rollins. He's on the phone. Brent from Pro Football Focus. How are you, Brent?
Doing great. Glad to be here.
And so what this show is going to be is kind of a look at the SEC and what's going on in the conference every week. Obviously, you hear some of our expertise on UGAsports.com about the Georgia Bulldogs, but we see a lot of what's going on in the conference. Coach Donnan is connected to a lot of people within the conference. And so I do want to establish that this is kind of a secondary show, an accompaniment, if you will, for the flagship podcast of UGA Sports, which is UGA Sports Live on Tuesdays. Coach is on that show as well, and I have been for the last few months. But we want to get into some of the things in the SEC because, guys, we're within 2 weeks of college football, really about a week and a half. And the way I kind of wanted to start this is give you some of the predictions that I have made. It's pinned to my Twitter feed on what's going to happen for each team in their season this year. It's kind of hard to make predictions, but we're going to at least go with that. And you tell me while I'm right or why I'm wrong. So we're going to start with Georgia's first opponent, and that is the Arkansas Razorbacks. So, Brent, I want to start with you. I've got Arkansas going 0-10. Tough for Sam Pittman. What do you think?
Sadly, I think actually spot on. And what's sad for them is, you go into a new situation. You don't have the normal schedule that you run into. You have a couple of games that feel like you can win early on, get some confidence, feel good about yourself. They start with Georgia game one, and then it's State, then it's Auburn, then it's Ole Miss, and it doesn't stop from there in the SEC West for them. They have some players returning. Rakeem Boyd being the highest graded player that ever for Pro Football Focus. And some breakout person and game breaker on offense, but unlike Sam Pittman, sort of is not one that's like this. But his offensive line depth is very little. It's not sort of going to take him time. So I actually, unfortunately, think you are right with your 10 prediction for them.
Coach, I know it's tough to take over a new program. What do you think?
That was really good. Way to go out on a limb on your first pick, both you guys. I mean, please let me have Vanderbilt, would you? Hey, I'm just going to say that, I think Coach Pittman will do a good job there down the road. They didn't leave many horses in the barn for him. Complete rehaul on philosophy, everything about it. But he's got some good coaches, and it'll work out pretty well, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's just going to be tough when you have an all SEC schedule. There's no breaks in there. There's going to be very few places to hide. It's going to be a tough road to hoe for Arkansas, as we say. I don't know if there's much more to say about them.
Well, at least for Georgia fans, if you're someone a Georgia fan and you're listening to this because of that, the quarterback you're going to see in game one is somebody you're used to seeing. You're going to see Felipe Franks, who's been at Florida and now is there and will be his quarterback.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. Coach, I want to kick it back to you for Alabama. I know you've got a lot of thoughts on the Crimson Tide. I've got Alabama in the 10-game SEC schedule going 8-2. Those 2 losses being at LSU and at Tennessee, which would really upset the Crimson Tide faithful. What are your thoughts on the Crimson Tide?
Well, first of all, it's going to be hard for anybody to go through this schedule playing all 10 games SEC-wise. Every team's got holes in it. The big question for Alabama is, can they rebuild their defense that was just unbelievable last year, whether it's injuries or coaching or whatever it might be. By the fact they've changed coordinators so many times there lately, two guys got head jobs and one guy left, and then the new guys there. But you just don't see Alabama giving up 40 points 3 times like they did last year. They got to be better defensively. Offensively, they should be whirling dervish on offense, depending on how good Mac Jones plays or the new kid if he comes in. But I would say that LSU game's going to be up in the air, but I would say beating Tennessee Tennessee beating Alabama. You know, they haven't beaten them since Caesar went over the Rubicon. So it's been a long time there for them. So I would say maybe 8-2, but that second loss might be to Georgia.
Brent?
I completely agree with Coach. I do think I don't see them losing at Tennessee whatsoever, but it's fascinating because, you know, Nick Saban, the coach, is, like Coach said, his defense prowess and what he's known for, what the sort of the ball that he's known for, and yet his offense is going to be one of, if not the best offense in college football with who they have returning at running back, at receiver, in terms of a massive amount of playmakers. They have Jalen Waddle, Don Smith, two of the highest returning receivers. We got just absolute lightning in a bottle from both of them. And Eid for Dave, Najee Harris, who I think is the second highest running back in the nation behind TTN. And it's one of those where the offense is going to have to carry the load while they build depth. And even more interesting about their defensive depth is it's not usually Coach Saban always has still 1 or 2 guys, or at least 2, that are experienced and you feel good about the secondary. And he really doesn't have it this year. They lost a lot of secondary players. They have Patrick Payne returning, but their experience was going to be a lot secondary. And I think that'd be interesting to see because how the game's evolved. They got sort of exploited in a way last year. But the secondary is one where, you know, that's when you look at Georgia week 3, that's an interesting matchup because Georgia has some playmakers there on the outside.
I think everyone's looking forward, including the CBS executives, to get Alabama and Georgia on a football field so everyone can see. And look, Coach, I get it. And both you guys, I know that Tennessee beating Alabama just seems wacky. But look, this season's going to be crazy. And the quality of football that I've seen so far to this point, there's going to be a lot of surprises, a lot of upsets, and they're going to come when you don't expect them. So I tried not to be very chalk with these picks.
Hey, that's a good way to do it. I mean, way to go out on a limb. I mean, hey, that's part of the deal. We'll see how it goes. But Tennessee, I would maybe think would be in better position to do that if they'd been able to practice more. But from reading about them, a lot of these guys have been quarantined or actually had COVID. So I saw where Coach Pruitt said that some of the guys may be going in that first game against South Carolina will not have any contact. They hadn't had any contact practice because they've been out of the fact that they couldn't practice. So we'll have to see how that goes. But who's your next one?
Yeah, that didn't work out well for Navy when it did. And I'll say that all I'm doing is risking public humiliation. I'm not willing to risk my money on Tennessee and Alabama. So it's not that confident of a pick. We'll go over to
Brent. I give you a lot of credit, though, Dayne. You know, you put those out there. Every single game, you're writing it on. You say, hey, here's my picks.
I criticize me or take it. I mean, and it's pinned to my Twitter profile, so I can't run from it.
Exactly.
Brent, I'm going to go to a guy that I know you love and you're excited to see in the SEC, Mike Leach and the Mississippi State Bulldogs. I've got them coming in with a 4-6 record, a little bit of a slow start, but with Leach, it tends to pick up toward the end of the season as he gets his hands around the offense more. What do you think about the air raid in the SEC West?
You can't even begin to describe how excited I am for Mike Leach to be in the SEC. And to me, it's his system with the talent I think that he'll be eventually able to accumulate. It's just going to be fun. And he puts it in, he's so quarterback friendly. And I think I tweeted out a couple weeks ago, the worst season during the PFF era is, 3,800 yards, 30 touchdowns, 10 interception type season. Now, granted, we haven't seen it in the SEC and against SEC defenses, but still yet his system, no matter where he's been, has produced great numbers, and he's gotten the best he can out of the quarterback. So them as a whole, he at least has somebody. At least has somebody in KJ Costello that transferred in from Stanford as someone who is experienced at the position, has played the highest levels of football, and from a talent perspective, is that, and a former, top 100 type recruit. So I think your 4-6 prediction is pretty well spot in that, depending upon if they get rolling, maybe they get to five wins and surprise somebody. But I will say, especially in that latter part, when they have Auburn at home, and then they have Alabama after a bye. Vandy should take care of business. Auburn at home, and then Georgia. 3 out of those 4. That's a tough stretch. But they're going to scare, I think, one of those teams. They're going to really put a scare into one of those 3 teams, and possibly even you have them winning at Auburn, but possibly even pull off a W because of just how much and how new his system is to this league.
If you're watching on YouTube, that voice belongs to Brent Rollins from Pro Football Focus. You may not see his square up on our meeting right now. We've killed his video to make sure that his audio was clean for some internet issues. Coach, do you have any Mike Leach stories? I know you know all these coaches and y'all run in the same circles. Do you have anything on Leach?
Yeah, I mean, the best Leach story I got is when we were playing Kentucky in '97 and playing them at home, and Mike Leach was a coordinator, and they had the ball on about their 20-yard line with like 15 seconds to go in the first half, and we were only winning not by much. And so they decided to throw the ball, and the guy threw the ball out in the flat. Really, I mean, it's like second down. He threw a 4-yard pass in the flat, and Ronald Bailey, Champ's brother, intercepted and went in for a touchdown. And later on, I've kidded Coach Leach. I said, "You ever seen anybody throw a 4-yard out with 15 seconds to go in a half on the road?" And of course, it was him, and he remembers that. So that helped us out a lot, that's for sure. And then over the years, I've kept up with him. I know when he was going out to get the job at Oklahoma as a coordinator, Bob Stoops asked me about him, and I'm very high on Mike Leach, and then Coach Switzer was high on him when he was there, and I've kept up with him over the years, and he's fired up about coaching the bullies down there. He'll do a good job for him.
Yeah, if he'll get in Starkville, and he's in Key West half the time, isn't he?
Yeah, he was based out of Key West during the COVID because he still got that place down there. That's where he met President Trump. I guess they were hanging out together back when Trump was not the president. So he's definitely got a lot of different things going.
All right, Coach, we're going to keep this going, and I'm going to give you a team that I think you know pretty well, one of your former staff members there, the Auburn Tigers, returning Bo Nix at quarterback. They do have a new offensive coordinator and play caller in Chad Morris, the former Arkansas head coach. I've got Auburn going 6-4. What are your thoughts on the Auburn Tigers?
Yeah, I think they're going to struggle on offense regardless of who's calling the plays. They just don't have the offensive line back that they had. I know that they got some good young linemen coming in, and they've got some speedy receivers, and hopefully this Tank Bigsby can help them at running back. They got the given, though, and Bo Nix should continue to improve and make things happen for him. But I just don't think that a guy that's been the offensive guy that Gus Malzahn's been over the years, I just can't see him turning the keys to the car over to another coach, even though Morris has had some limited success as an offensive coach at Clemson. He had some pretty good success against the lesser teams, but he didn't win against Florida State, 1-3 against South Carolina, and Clemson's 75-5 since he left. So
wow.
They did okay without him. And then he's had a terrible record as a head coach. Now, certainly he's in the rebuilding mode there at Arkansas and at Southern Miss. But as a head coach, you got to coach the defense too. And their defense really was in bad shape at both places, gave up over 50 points, I think 7 or 8 times. So, the guy's a good coach, but I just would, if I was Malzahn, I would certainly look at maybe checking that out again. I just think Malzahn's really an excellent coach that's had tremendous success on offense. He's not going to have the defense back that he had. He lost some yeoman defensive linemen, and I think Coach Steele's one of the best defensive coaches around. But 6-4 to me is kind of a reach for them based on the fact that their personnel coming back.
Brent, we did the analysis. Can you kind of speak to what Auburn lost on defense?
I mean, the defensive line is self-explanatory with Marlon Davidson now trying to play for the Falcons. He didn't play week 1, but then Derek Brown in Carolina. But, what's so interesting about that is that not only, Gus now has a quarterback he's got returning. He's got, Williams back as a running back, and he's got 2 wide receivers that he should really like, and Anthony Schwartz and Seth Williams, but he basically lost his entire offensive line. And from a scheduling standpoint, I think the SEC schedule gods kind of did them maybe the least favor in that they replacing a lot of your defensive line and then also replacing almost your entire offensive line. You go play Kentucky and Georgia in your first 2 weeks, who are teams that return a lot of players along that in the offensive defensive line, and they're two of the more physical teams in the conference. So they could very well start 0-2, and then who knows what happens after that. But it's going to be tough for them sledding, I think, initially, unless the quarterback takes a big leap and sort of overcomes a lot of those issues. But I don't know that I see that happening. I think your 6-4-ish they're going to be in that neighborhood.
I'm going to stick with you, Brent, and give you a team that is probably as unpredictable as any in the conference right now. The national championship LSU Tigers, losing so much from that team that won the national championship, including a Heisman winning quarterback, a Biletnikoff winning wide receiver. I've got LSU rebounding pretty well considering and going 8-2, in part because they drew a pretty favorable schedule. Your thoughts on the LSU Tigers?
I tend to agree because I think they can get going early. They have Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, Missouri as their first 3 games before they play at Florida. And what's amazing is we've already seen one. They thought they were going to have Jamar Chase. He's opted out and is not going to play this season. And then you have first round, number 1 overall pick, you lose, and then a first round running back we saw do a lot of great things on Thursday Night Football last week, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So the amount of talent that they have to place is unbelievable. And it's going to be interesting to see how much and how quickly they sort of keep up and get rolling. But again, the schedule part kind of helps them. They can get rolling, I think, early.
And coach, it's not just for LSU losing the amount of talent on the field. It's on the sidelines too. New offensive and defensive coordinators, Bo Pelini coming back to Baton Rouge. What do you think about the coaching changes that Ed Orgeron made?
Well, I think Bo will do a good job. They're switching to a 4-3 front, which he's pretty familiar with, and that should help him from a standpoint. He's installing his system. He's not taking over a system and trying to do what Aranda did there, who's left and gone to Baylor. And then, Steve Ensminger still called the plays last year, even though Joe was there and did a good job. Now he's with Joe Brady's with the Carolina Panthers. But I just think when you lose that many players to the draft and that many players that came out early, juniors, and you look at the guys that have opted out, it's going to be hard. They got about 70 guys on scholarship now. They can't afford any injuries depth-wise, even though they're talented. But I think they'll have a hard time emulating that offense, losing the guys they did. But I would say, as Brent said, their schedule helps them. But I would say 7-3 more than 8-2.
So we're kind of close to the same range. It's the losses I have for LSU right now are at Florida, at Auburn, and so you would think maybe Alabama could easily be another one, maybe a Texas A&M or one of the Mississippis. All right, so Coach, I'm going to give you another new coach in the conference. Lane Kiffin returns to the Ole Miss Rebels. We know that the Rebels have some talent. John Rice Plumlee was a really explosive quarterback on the ground. I've got Ole Miss going 4-6 in Lane Kiffin's first year.
Yeah, I think the one thing that he has maybe, is a knowledge of the SEC over these other new coaches. Just the fact that he's been in the league and coached against and these different defenses he's going to see. That's going to be an adjustment for Coach Leach. So many different defenses that they don't run in the Pac-12 that they'll see out here because everybody's so pass conscious in the Pac-12. You're going to see a lot of zone blitz, a lot of things that, I'm sure he can adjust to it, but I think that's going to help Kiffin. But what's going to hurt him is defensively, I just don't see them turning the corner as quickly as they need to. And, they're going to always talk about which quarterback, should it be Corral or should it be Plumlee? And, Corral maybe fits Lane's MO a little more as far as backing up and throwing the ball. But you got to remember, Plumlee is a human rocket back there. He got all that yardage against LSU, the national champion last year. He scored, I think, 37 points against them. So I think they're going to be probably the second best team in Mississippi this year, behind Mississippi State, because Southern Miss seems to not be the first anymore. They used to be the best.
I'll say that Thanksgiving weekend, it's one of my favorite games every year. But when Mississippi State plays Ole Miss with Mike Leach and Lane Kiffin, especially based off what happened in last year's Egg Bowl, which just sent shockwaves through all of college football, that's going to be unbelievable to watch.
Yeah,
Brent, you may have to come over to my house for that.
Instead of raising your arm, you raise your leg.
Hey, it's life with Mike Leach and Lane Kiffin in the SEC is way more interesting. That's just, it is what, and fun follows on Twitter too, by the way, both of them.
And Brent, we've got one more team in the West, and they are yours. It is Jimbo Fisher and the Texas A&M Aggies. And I admit that if I have a flaw in my schedule predictions, it's probably that Texas A&M is more talented than the 4-6 record that I'm giving them credit for. However, the schedule's just quite difficult, and I think it's going to be tough with a quarterback that I don't think's proven. What are your thoughts on Kellen Mond, Jimbo Fisher, and the Aggies?
I think it's going to be an interesting year because he's a guy who's been there and played so much in terms of the snaps he played, and he doesn't really look that different to me than he did when he first started playing. And he finally this last season he's going to be there really truly elite, but because we know he's a threat with his legs, but really the passing game. And if that's the case, now I will say it didn't help that one of his better receivers just recently, I think I saw opted out, Osborne. So that did not help their case, but they do have to me, a big time playmaker and future playmaker in the league. And the tight end Weidermeyer, I think he's going to be someone who is prominently involved in their offense. But, from a talent perspective, it should be there. And this is now what year 3 with and it's time. And you would think with the senior quarterback you could get there, but I don't know that I see it, especially with the schedule, and especially in the division that they play.
Yeah, the one thing I would say about A&M, they certainly played the most difficult schedule of anybody last year, having to play Clemson, Alabama, LSU, 3 teams that were in the playoffs. And this year their schedule was very favorable. Non-conference, they were going to run the table. Just showing up. So they had, 4 W's right there on their non-conference games. And now they end up picking up these teams, like Brent alluded to. Their schedule they picked up 2 tough teams here on the non-conference. So I think they're going to have to play week in and week out, error-free football, because they just don't seem to be able to generate points. They were in a lot of games last year. You look at against the Georgia game, they had the ball going for the winning touchdown in the fourth quarter, but they just couldn't make it happen. And then their defense couldn't get off the field, and Georgia ran the clock out. But they played a lot of close games. I don't see them being quite as good on defense, losing some of the guys they lost and some of the people that transferred. So I think that's a pretty good pick by you. I'll agree with that.
Coach, overall,
Coach.
Oh, go ahead, Brent.
I was going to say, Coach, is there with Mond? How do you envision him, or do you envision him at all taking any kind of leap, or do you think he is what he is?
Yeah, he's a system guy for them, because Jimbo believes in him, and Jimbo puts a ton of stuff on the quarterback's plate. Anybody that watches their game, they go right down to the wire on every snap on using the 40-second clock, because they change the protection, they change the routes, they do a lot of stuff, because Jimbo's an excellent quarterback coach. You look at the guys he's had over the years, and he really trains them. And Darryl Dickey, the coordinator, is the same thing. He's a great quarterback coach. So they put a lot of pressure on Mon to make the right calls. And I would like to see him go a little faster once in a while and not try to be quite so perfect, because I think he's trying to do so much that sometimes he hurts himself, and he's not loosey-goosey enough. So he's pretty good about taking care of the ball, but he's definitely got the athleticism and the arm to be a big-time quarterback.
Brent, one of the narratives about the SEC in recent years is that the West has just been better than the East. And I think as a whole, you have to say that's probably the case. But based on the predictions I have and some of the analysis we've done, it feels like some of that is being weighted more toward the East, to where maybe the league's a bit more balanced. Are you seeing that?
Balance at the top half. I think the bottom half of the league is still just that. It's the bottom half of the league. And I don't know that you're going to – I think like someone like A&M. I think A&M is someone who would do quite well if they were in the East. But, I still think when you week in and week out – and now, by the way, playing in conference-only schedule, it's going to be an absolute grind for all these teams week in, week out. And you can't measure that, I think.
Coach, we get to start with you with the SEC East, and you ask for it. I'll give them to you. The Vanderbilt Commodores. I do have Vandy going 0-10, which may be enough to secure Derek Mason's job, especially with the financial woes that happened in 2020. What do you think about Vandy?
Vandy's had some really good players on offense last year, and nothing really happened with them. I mean, they couldn't generate the points. They made another change at the coordinator. Now got another coordinator there in offense and defense. I think they might have the same guy, but realistically, just outmanned. I mean, they're going against some really good football teams, and you look at teams that they've been able to beat over the last few years, like Tennessee. Tennessee's gotten a lot better now. They beat Tennessee like 2 years in a row, and now maybe 3 years in a row. And now Tennessee's just got the talent level over them. And I think the point that Brent just made about, teams in the East and the West, I think the East was able to last year make a little bit of a move on the Western teams. But teams like Kentucky now, to me, with their offense and defensive lines, that's where they're going to make their hay. They can really line up physically and play with anybody. So you look at a couple teams in the East right now that really are outmanned, as far as I'm concerned, are Missouri and also Vanderbilt. So I just don't see them being able, unless they just get, some team goes haywire and turns the ball over them. I think they're going to have a hard time winning any.
Well, if you agree with the 0-10 on Vandy and then also Arkansas, this sets up my perfect dream scenario where the SEC would enable relegation, just like they have in European soccer, where the day of the SEC championship game, in this case, Vanderbilt and Arkansas would play each other, and the loser would go down to the Sun Belt and be replaced by the Sun Belt champion. Yeah, I think it's a brilliant idea.
Oh, the Big Ten's going to do that this year. When they have championship week, number twos from each division is going to play number 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, 5. So everybody's going to have that extra game, including the championship game between Ohio State probably and Wisconsin. So it's a good idea. I give them an extra game.
We're inching closer to my pipe dream. It'll happen one day, I promise you. Brent, let's go to you. And Coach mentioned the Missouri Tigers. Let's go there. Missouri new head coach, replacing a lot, new quarterback. What do you see from what's going on in Columbia?
A lot of talent that they don't have on the offensive side of the ball. And what's going to be interesting is Drinkwitz is now the second youngest Power 5 head coach, other than Lincoln Riley, which, by the way, the fact that Lincoln Riley is still the youngest Power 5 head coach is amazing, considering what he's done so early on in his career. But it's going to be interesting to see how he uses what little that he has from a talent perspective coming back within their offensive scheme. But they do have some serious talent on defense, and Nick Bolton is probably the best, if not one of the best linebackers in the country. But it's just the totality of it, especially as Coach said just a minute ago, along the offensive and defensive lines. You lose someone like they had last year in Jordan Elliott, and then consecutive years they've had players that they've lost to the draft along the defensive line. It's just going to be hard to compete week in and week out when that is not the strength of your team.
And you look at, they haven't beaten a top 25 team since 2014. And Wow. They got to play all those teams, that they were really making their hay with some really good non-conference wins that made them bowl eligible. And, then they were playing Arkansas in the crossover, and they had a big win last year. A couple years ago, beat Florida down there. But, I think realistically, and that might be wrong, Florida might have been the only team in the top 20. I don't know if Florida was in the top 25 when they beat them, but I just think it's going to be a tough job for anybody to rebuild with the way recruiting is now, and the NCAA put out the deal that you can't we're going to have a dead period through January 1st. And you got these programs trying to build up, and none of these kids have ever even met these coaches live or talked to them. I mean, I just don't see how you're able to recruit to that. Maybe they can, but we'll see.
I've got Missouri going 2-8, and it sounds like you guys are probably around that same range for the Tigers. Let's go to the other Columbia coach. This is for you. I like to call Columbia, South Carolina, their athletic office. It's kind of like the UGA alumni chapter for the Columbia region with Mike Bobo now there and Will Muschamp. You've got Fatone Bauta and Joe Cox. Just a ton of former Bulldogs trying to run that program. What do you see from Ryan Helinski as the starting quarterback, and then replacing a lot on the defensive line for the Gamecocks?
You know, I think it's still up for grabs whether they're going to start Helinski or that kid that transferred Hill from that Bobo brought in from CSU. He knows his system. He knows in and out. He's had a really tough career with, I think, 3 ACL injuries, not 2. He's had 3. He is from Spartanburg or close to there, and he's got some South Carolina roots. You know, I think it hurt them when they lost Marshawn Lloyd, the running back that was so highly recruited. But, you know, they'll have some structure on offense, and they'll be competitive. The last couple of years, they just haven't been able to put up enough points. Defensively, you know, they still are always going to be well coached with Muschamp there and T-Rob running the defense. But what did you predict their schedule is going to be? I didn't hear that.
Yeah, I've got South Carolina at 3-7.
Okay, I think that's probably pretty much what you'll see, unless they get a couple tight wins. Like, you know, who would have thought they'd beat Georgia last year? But really, one of the most unbelievable games I've ever watched, when a team never got in the red zone the whole game and still won the game. It was just unreal. But 3 turnovers like that, you're going to have a chance to win. And they'll be well coached, and you know, they got a break in the fact they don't have to play Clemson. But you know, I think they picked up a couple tougher games too. I mean, tough games too, not maybe like Clemson, but certainly they got to play Alabama, I think, and Texas A&M. And who do they play? I don't even know. But 3-7 sounds good to me.
The wins that I have for South Carolina are at Vanderbilt, Texas A&M at home, and then Missouri. Losses to Tennessee, Florida, Auburn, LSU. I've got them losing at Ole Miss. That seems like a tricky game for South Carolina, but then also Georgia and then at Kentucky.
Yeah, they don't play Bama. So I think Ole Miss game is going to be big for both teams. You know, that's one that either team could win. But pulling hard for them. I like to see Will and Mike do well, but I think it's going to – I don't want them to do so well that they did to us like they did last year. So we need to go down there to Columbia and take care of business.
Brent, I've got another person that's familiar with Athens. Jeremy Pruitt, former Georgia defensive coordinator, seemingly has Tennessee headed in the right direction. I've got the Volunteers going 7-3 with losses to Auburn, Kentucky, and Georgia, sneaking out a win against Florida at the end of the season, which would be quite an accomplishment, something that hasn't happened in quite a while. What are your thoughts on the Volunteers?
I think they're getting there. They're obviously improving. Their overall level of talent is improving, especially along the offensive and defensive lines. They're going to have an offensive line that, you know, returns to you guys who really, by the way, were some of the lowest graded tackles in the SEC this past year. But, you know, we'll have that year of experience in Wright and Morris that were 5, you know, former sort of highly recruited tackles. And then Trey Smith, by the way, which was to me very shocking that he returned for his senior year, given all of his health issues, but still yet, you know, good for them that he's going to be there, because he's one of the best linemen in the country and one of the highest rated guards that we have returning. But, and then also you evidently don't get to necessarily add Cade Mays at that point, because we'll get to that. We can get to that in another time. That's another story for another day. But, you know, still yet the totality of their talent is getting there. They have talent in the secondary, even though they lost their best player in Nigel Warrior in the secondary. I think they are still going to have, you know, Sean Schamberger that's a player, Jalen McCall that's graded out well for them as well. Again, as much with any team we're talking about, just like we talked about with Texas A&M, the leap for them depends on the quarterback play. And you now have Garantano, who's going to be there yet again, and it seems like he's been there for a good long while, but who also now lost his top 2 receivers, including, you know, Juwan Jennings, who was one of the best players in the league a season ago. So can you replace the production at receiver? and get sort of that leap and more consistency from the quarterback. If you can, I think they can get to your 7-3. If they don't, I think they're looking more in the sort of 500 range.
Hey, if you look at their schedule now, to go 7-3, they got to beat Alabama, LSU, Florida, and then besides winning the rest of the other games, Georgia. So they got 4 teams in the top 6 in the country right now that they got to play. So 7-3 would be Ben-Hur for me.
It would be quite an accomplishment, but I think Jeremy Pruitt's put together a pretty good staff in Tennessee, and like we said, the talent's better. I just see them slowly creeping, but the team coach that I've been really impressed with from the offseason analysis that Brent and I have done for UGASports.com, the Kentucky Wildcats, led by Mark Stoops. I think in a 10-game conference slate, I've got Kentucky going 7-3, which would be a really good season for what Kentucky is used to.
Are you talking basketball?
They're not recruiting that well, but I don't know if they brought out the bagman like that.
Yeah, I agree with you. Stoops has done a good job of maintaining the program and building it gradually. They started off with some really horrendous losses, some coaching decisions that hurt him. I know I made a lot of bad mistakes early on in my career and late, but I think he's starting to get a lot better sideline management, and some inexplicable losses that turned into tight game wins for him. And he's got a veteran coach there, and Eddie Grand calling the plays. I think the big key that anybody would look at with this team is they won 8-9 games, won the bowl game last year against Penn State with a wide receiver playing quarterback, running the Wildcat. Now with Wilson back, who's more of a threat throwing the ball, maybe not as much running it, I think they'll have a lot better passing game. Their offense and defensive lines match up with anybody, not only in the SEC, but in the country. They got a tremendous center. I just think that's a realistic deal with them. With their schedule, I think they could win 6-7 games and maybe even more. I mean, they're going to be a tough out for Georgia and Florida in the conference, and they're going to be tough for Auburn in that first game. I look for them to be one of the better teams in the country this year, the Kentucky Wildcats.
Brent, when we looked at Kentucky's offensive line, I was kind of blown away with the talent and production that's returning. What have you seen from PFF on what Kentucky has coming back?
4 of the 5 highest graded returning linemen in the conference are on the Kentucky Wildcats. And when you look at just the totality, specifically from our grading standpoint, we have, I think I tweeted this out a while back, but number of players with an overall grade of 70 or greater, which is, sort of competent starters and above average starters that played at least 130 snaps a year ago. So at least played double-digit snaps in every game on average. It's UGA is at the top, and Bama and Kentucky tied at second with 15 players that are returning with that high level of grade. And like Coach said, if they get the threat in the passing game, and I think one of the interesting things for them schematically, and Coach can speak to this as well, is when they had to put Bowden at quarterback, they actually had to get very creative in the running game. And they had some of the most creative counter plays and action in the running game that anybody in the country was running. And I think if you can now mesh that with someone who has the throwing ability and has sort of produced at a average, at least above average quarterback level in Wilson, and if he can stay healthy, because he's obviously coming off a knee injury, they can really be something. And for their schedule wise, that first game is, to me, the game of the week in the conference. And maybe we'll hit that next week when we get to talk about like actual games. But that at Auburn, that is a fantastic week 1 game.
Brent, I'm going to stay with you because we've got the Florida Gators. I've got 8-2 for Dan Mullen and his squad. Kyle Trask will be the quarterback, at least to start the season. I'm not convinced that it will remain that way. What have you seen from Florida?
Well, from a talent perspective, they have as much talent returning as anybody in the conference. When we did our breakdowns of the highest graded players for each team that's on Georgia's schedule, we had Alabama, Kentucky that we had to sort of separate into offense and defense, and Florida was the other team. Everybody else we could do in one piece, but we had to actually separate that. And there's a lot of talent, specifically in the secondary, returning for them. Can Trask, and this is something that's been a big off-season topic for us at PFF, is Trask traditional numbers I think, almost 3,000 yards, mid-20s touchdowns, very low, and the interceptions were very high, but his grade, I think, was right around 68, 69 from our perspective, because he was one of the conference's leaders in turnover-worthy plays and didn't hit big-time throws, the highest graded throws. He just really brought consistency to their offense, and that kind of lended itself to them being productive. But it'll be interesting to see this year, one, since he's the guy, does he take a leap and, become that sort of upper echelon quarterback in the conference, or do maybe some of those turnover-worthy plays in a way regress back to the mean and they turn into actual interceptions and/or turnovers that weren't a season ago. So, but from a scheduling standpoint, there's very certain possibility with having LSU home and then Ole Miss, South Carolina, A&M, and then Missouri in their first 5 games, that when they head into Georgia on November 7th, or play Georgia and Jacksonville on November 7th, that they're 5-0 and rolling and confident and all the things that go with being 5-0.
Coach, any thoughts on Florida?
Yeah, I think they really benefited from the schedule, as far as who they picked up and who they didn't pick up, and Georgia certainly got a tougher front end schedule than they do. Georgia's back end's maybe not as tough, but I'm sure it's not. But I think the thing with their football team is, can their offense and defense mesh and play together at the same time? When they really needed the defense last year against Georgia, they couldn't get off the field. 27 first downs Georgia made. Unbelievable amount of third down and fourth down conversions against them. And then the year before, their defense played fairly well, but their offense, didn't generate the points. So I think, and then last year their offense really didn't need it. But I'm saying, to get over the hump, you got to beat Georgia and you got to beat Kirby Smart. Mullen's got a 1-11 record against them as a head coach. Some of these games were not when Kirby was the head coach, but I think that's got to be in his mind. I know when the game started last year, they had 2 delay of game penalties in the first series. And it's whoever fault it was, it doesn't matter. It just kind of gets your team up in the air when you have that kind of stuff happen. But I think he's a really good coach. He did a terrific job at Mississippi State. He got some good coaches on his staff. The biggest thing that's got to happen for Florida to make the jump to catch Georgia is they got to recruit better year in and year out. They lose way too many players in the state to other schools outside the state, and they haven't recruited on the level that Spurrier or Urban Meyer has. They have won 10, 11 games the last 2 years, but against a very weakened SEC East. There's no question about it. They got a lot of good wins. So I think if they can get over and play together on both sides of the ball, they got the shot. But I don't see them overtaking Georgia this year.
And neither do I. And that's why the last team we have to discuss is the Georgia Bulldogs. I've got Georgia going 9-1. I actually do think it's a favorable schedule, even though it is front loaded a little bit. Some offensive identity is going to have to be found with a ton of changes, but the defense is going to be among, if not the best in the country, in my opinion. Coach, Georgia looks prime for another SEC East run. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the people on the Georgia site, and you and I and Dayne, we look at it. We have a tendency to look about what we don't have, because that's a normal thing on any business, is assets, your weaknesses, and try to overcome them with your strengths. So everybody's talking about what we don't have. And certainly we don't have some of the offensive linemen that we lost. We lost 8 players to the NFL on offense alone last year, 5 of them juniors. But what we do have is some fantastic young talent and some really good experienced talent that could play for anybody in the country. And you mesh that with a really good kicking game and a brilliant head coach who has really developed very quickly in 4 years to be one of the best coaches in the country, and a really good staff supplanting him. I think the big deal for us is, can our offense generate and take care of the ball at the same time, enough offense to make up for, anything that we might lose with turnovers and mistakes and all, because I don't think anybody's going to score a lot of points on us. I mean, there's going to be some times where they people get big plays and all that. But again, my glass is more than half full about the Dogs. I know we had a show on Tuesday where I talked about some problems we have, which we do have problems, but I wouldn't trade our personnel with anybody in the country right now. I think our personnel ranks right up there, 1 through 85 with anybody. We're going to have to get good play out of our young quarterback. We don't know what's going to happen with Daniels at this point, but I like the Dogs' chances to be really good.
Brent, I don't see any team in the conference going undefeated. Is 9-1 attainable for Georgia?
I think it is. It very much is. And like Coach said, as the defense is going to be there. It's the deepest and most talented overall probably defense in the nation. They were much of that a season ago, and that's going to be there. And the experience is there. Everything is there defensively that you would need. Depth, talent, every level. There's no weakness from a player standpoint. And while they don't have a Stinney that's like the highest graded corner in the country, or they don't have, a Bolton that's the highest graded linebacker in the country, they have 0 players anywhere that are just minuses on the defense. So it's going to be there. Offensively, it's going to be fun to watch, I think, just to see, can they grow? Can you take, and specifically if DeJuan Mathis is your quarterback, and he's the guy early, because of the running element that he brings. And I've had even people tell me that he's one of the top 5 fastest kids on the team, let alone, anything else. So there's legit level of speed and explosiveness from that position. And you look at their schedule, when they play Alabama, right before Alabama plays Georgia, Alabama plays Ole Miss. And you're going to have, if, Plumlee plays a lot and Lane Kiffin uses even a combination of quarterbacks, you might have a blueprint of how you can go attack Alabama offensively with a combination of DeJuan and maybe JT Daniels if everything works out for him health-wise. So as that offense grows and comes along, I think they're going to be just fine. And I think your 9-1 prediction is pretty spot on. I agree. I don't see anyone in a 10-game conference schedule. Now, I do think best case scenario, if you get that victory at Alabama, I think they can go 10-0. And I think them and Alabama are the 2 that can go 10-0. But the likelihood of that is very slim given the fact you're playing these guys and playing SEC teams week in and week out.
Hey, Coach, I know this is a SEC-centric show, but I did want to get your thoughts on what the Big Ten is trying to do to reverse course to play in the fall, and potentially it sounds like the Pac-12 is having some conversations as well.
As a football fan, I'm happy to have these teams, and for mostly for the players. It's just to be able to get back and play, because particularly the seniors, and it's just to have it taken away from me. And everybody realizes why they made the decision, and I understand the safety protocols and all that. But hopefully we can get collective and share information among these conferences and all about testing and about tracing and everything. It looks like basketball's got that under control because they're scheduling. Everybody's talking in one voice. But I'm happy for the Big Ten players. I know several of their coaches. I'm happy for Coach Tucker, to get a chance to coach his football team. Here's his first year up there. And it's just showed some real forthright leadership on their part among the presidents to understand that, hey, we were very cautious, but maybe we were too cautious. And now we got more information, and we're going to be able to utilize that and let them play. So, and we see right here at UGA, I mean, a week ago, you and I were talking about all the outbreak on campus. And then this week we've got a whole lot less. So hopefully everybody's learning their lesson and be smart. And, but we all got to remember, football is just a real small pebble on the beach here compared to what human life is. So we got to be understanding that football is important, but not like the safety and health of so many humans around the country.
And I don't know anyone that loves football more than you. So to have that perspective on it's really healthy, because I know you want to see as much football as can be played in a safe manner. Well, guys, this is it. That's our first show for Around the League from UGAsports.com with Coach Donnan, Dayne, and Doc, Brent Rollins. We've got a fun week coming next week because we've got games to talk about. Week 1 is what we'll focus on. So do your homework, and you got to give me some kind of upset pick that we can clue our listeners into.
Yeah, the other thing I'd like to just tell hopefully you can, these different fans can tell the different websites, but between you and Brent, you bring so much knowledge about the other teams because you guys study them so much more than I do. And Brent having the ability to grade these other teams just gives us perspective that nobody else can give because he knows the number of snaps they played. He knows their height, weight, their boyfriend, the girlfriend. I mean, hopefully they don't have boyfriends, but the whole point is they know know everything about all these teams, and hopefully everybody will enjoy this format. I know I enjoy listening to both of you guys talk about them, and SEC is where it is. I mean, we all three love Georgia and everything, but it's nice to see the SEC playing. And the other thing I would point out, that we're going to have our show again, the watch along, where we'll have, you can watch the game, explain it to them there, Dayne, what they can do to watch the game next Saturday at 4:00.
Yeah, so if you get on our YouTube channel, I think we're also going to have it on UGA Sports on Facebook as well. But if you're watching this on YouTube, it's the same channel. We're going to have a watch along party. It goes on for the entirety of the games. You're talking 4+ hours typically of us talking Georgia football as it's happening. So it'll be typically me and Roddy Nabulsi with Coach Donnan. Brent Rollins did hop in a few times last year, so he may join as well. And we're telling you what's happening as it goes on. And Coach can tell you plays from the formations that he sees and what he would do in this situation. He knows a lot of these guys around the program and has seen them from coming in as recruits to now starring for Georgia. So you won't get any better perspective. Brent, you better get some sleep, man, because you got some film to break down here coming in about 10 days.
It's so ready for it. I'm ready for games. I'm already staying up. I'm ready for Bengals Browns tonight. Let's go. Joe Burrow and Baker Mayfield. Have some fun. More football's better.
All right, guys. Well, we're going to wrap this show, and we will see you next Thursday at 1:00.